Okay, well, I'll begin. So I know it's nearly lunchtime and everyone's keen to get something to eat, so I won't hold you up any longer. Thank you everyone for coming to the session today. My name's Matt and I'm from Be Online Learning. And the session I'm going to talk to you about today is around e-learning and accessibility, because it seems to be becoming more prevalent and something that certainly people are talking more about. So just trying to continue on that conversation and just, I guess, make people a bit more aware about the sorts of things that we can do to make our e-learning more accessible to our users or our learners. So it's an exciting time to be in e-learning, I think, where our authoring tools and things that we use to create e-learning are becoming more powerful. I think generally we've moved or are moving beyond the whole idea of text and next kind of courses. You know, we're gamifying, we're storytelling, we're using scenarios, we're creating micro-learning, we're creating performance support, maybe setting up online spaces. But something I guess that we need to think about in all that good stuff is that the e-learning or whatever it is that we're making, be accessible to everyone? Will people be able to get the same experience from our particular learning program that's sort of as equal as we can be for everyone? So when I first started working in the e-learning space a few years ago, I guess the way I would approach something like accessibility would be that if no one really said that they had a barrier or something that was going to impact on their learning, then I didn't really need to have to do too much. Because if no one said that there was something wrong, well then I didn't really have to make any changes, or if we could just make another version of the course and have two versions, one for everyone and one for a certain audience of learners. But over time and with experience, I guess I realised that this wasn't the right way to think. So I guess I've changed my thinking in terms of accessibility as I have learned and am still learning more about it. So I went to the Australian Network on Disability website and found a few statistics about how many people maybe have disabilities within our community and within our society. And these are a few of the figures that I pulled from the website. And I guess I didn't realise, what the extent or what the numbers are. Certainly the 90% of disabilities that aren't visible was something that surprised me and I found a bit interesting. And I would say that there's a fair chance that potentially people that are taking our e-learning courses and in the various forms potentially could fit into some of those categories. And I guess we need to think about, well, how is our e-learning going to be accessible to them? But it's also more than just people with disabilities. It could also be people that have low literacy, or people that work in an environment where maybe they don't have sound available, or maybe they're colourblind or something like that. So what I'm going to talk about today is just some techniques and things that you can use and apply to help cater for different groups of people. Now, does anyone know who this is? No? No one's seen him? His name's Tim Berners-Lee. Now, maybe the name might be familiar. Do you know what what he's famous for? Sorry? He invented the internet, that's correct. He's also the director of the World Wide Web Consortium. It's a bit of a mouthful to say. And they created a set of international standards around accessibility called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And that's how I'll refer to it, as WCAG, throughout my talk today. And the guidelines aim to make web content accessible for everyone. And especially in government and in the wider community, other organisations are adopting, WCAG as adopting the guidelines to help make their e-learning accessible to people taking their courses. So following these guidelines will help to make content accessible to a wide range of people, so those included in the statistics that you saw before, but also for users in general to help make it more accessible to them. Now, you may have heard of a set of standards called Section 508. You may not have. They're more related to the American Rehabilitation Act. They do similar things in trying to make content more accessible for people. But the WCAG guidelines, WCAG is much more encompassing and covers more things. Now, again, as part of some preparation for my talk today, I created a little survey and I sent it out to some people that I knew that worked in e-learning and L&D There was people that did our Articulate training, people that are completing our Master eLearning course. I tweeted it out and put it on LinkedIn. And it was just for people that are in the e-learning space. I just wanted to get a bit of a sense and a bit of an idea of, what people know about WCAG and what sorts of things are they doing to make their content more accessible. And I think there's more value in that because it's not just about me kind of, spruiking about what you should do, but I wanted to find out what people are actually doing. Now, there was only 5 questions and I had 60 people respond and complete the survey. So, and again, I know this isn't a scientific survey by any sort of stretch, but it kind of does give you a bit of sense of what people are doing. And I'll refer to some of the responses throughout my talk today. So the first question I asked, and I'll throw it out to all of you as well, is without looking it up, do you know what it is? Do you know what WCAG is? And who would say yes, that they would? Yep. What about, who would be no? They don't have no idea. No one? Couple? That's okay. Look, and again, we're not here to judge today. It's not about that. It's more of an awareness kind of thing. What about, you may have heard of it, but don't really know what they are? A little bit of that. So what I found from my little survey was that I had 13 people out of the 60 say that, yes, they knew what it was. I had 37 say that they didn't know what it was, and I had a further 10 that said they'd heard of it that didn't know what it, they'd heard of it, but they didn't really know what it was. So I thought it was interesting, just because I mean, the idea was that it would go out to people working in this kind of space, and some of those were government people as well. And it kind of does help to explain some of the responses that I got as to some of my other questions in the survey. So what WCAG is, if you don't know, it's a technical standard, and it comprises of 4 principles that aim to make online content more accessible. And the 4 principles are that it needs to be perceivable, so the user must be able to perceive the information that's being presented. So, technically it says it can't be invisible to any of their senses. It must be operable. So that means the user must be able to operate the interface. So there can't be like interactions and things that the user can't perform. It must be understandable. So the user must be able to understand the content that's being presented and also how to navigate and operate the interface. So that falls under that. And then it must be robust. So what robust is referring to is that it must be able to be interpreted by things like assistive technologies if people are using those particular things to view online content. And I guess being in the learning industry, another acronym we can throw in now, we've got the PAW acronym when we start to think about WCAG. So underneath those 4 guidelines are 12 principles. And this will be the worst PowerPoint slide out of my deck. It's got the most text on it, so apologies for that. But these are the principles that fall under the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So things like text alternatives, the user being able to navigate via the keyboard, giving people enough time to view and read content. Making the text readable and understandable, letting people correct their mistakes, all different things like that. So they're the guidelines. And actually when you look it up, and I've got a whole list of resources at the end that I'll be able to share with you, it's actually quite detailed and quite involved. And as somebody did point out in the survey, it can be very hard to kind of achieve 100% compliance, and I would agree because there's so much stuff and a lot of it's open for interpretation in a lot of areas, like these kinds of things tend to be sometimes. Now, they also have, for each of these principles and guidelines, there's what they call testable success criteria. And all that means is that, the level of accessibility is rated on 3 different levels. There's level A, which is like the bare minimum. There's double A, which is more enhanced. And then there's triple A, which is like advanced compliance. Now, in talking to people that I come in contact with that work in government agencies, who they've adopted, WCAG for online content. And my understanding is that at the moment they're aiming for AA standard. I think they came in December last year, just from some information that I read. So, and as again somebody pointed out in the survey that it doesn't really apply to corporates, and in a way it doesn't. I mean, hasn't been mandated like it has with government agencies, but it's certainly something that we can and should consider. Now, obviously there's a lot of stuff in all of this, in all of those points, and I only have probably less time than what I had before. So we won't cover everything. I just want to cover off on a few things and a few little techniques that you can use and apply to your courses to help make them more accessible. So the next question I asked was, do authoring tools alone ensure that accessibility requirements are met? And thankfully, out of all of those people that completed the survey, only one said yes, assuming that the tool that we use to create our e-learning is going to just do it all for us. Actually, somebody even commented it would be good if we had a feature that we could just turn on and it did everything for us. But I think they're a long way off that. And it's good that people do know that, because there's actually two factors, I believe, that go into creating accessible learning. One is obviously the capabilities of our authoring tool. You know, they can do some things like, and I'm not just, I'll refer to Storyline, but I know the others can do this as well. Things like keyboard access, like navigation and accessibility, you know, adding alternate text and a few other bits and pieces. They can do that. They allow us to do that. That's already built in. I don't have to do anything special to make that happen. But there's also the design decisions that we make as people that are creating online content. And in fact, I think there are more decisions that we make that go into deciding whether our content is accessible than kind of what we often realise. So things like the types of interactions that we include, the colour combinations that we use in our courses, the fonts or typefaces that we use. The language we use, the way we write, is it too verbose? Is it too, hard for people to understand? Is it too technical, or is it too just a copy of the policy? Even the layout of our screens and how people navigate our content all have an impact on how accessible that is for people to use. And I guess from my perspective, it's, authoring tools don't build e-learning, people do. So I guess we need to think about what we do as developers. And certainly I'm still learning about this as well in creating more accessible content for people. Okay, so the next question I asked was, do you intentionally factor in accessibility as part of your design and development? And 60% of the people that filled in the survey said that they did, and 40% said that they didn't. And that's okay, there's no judgment here. But I found that interesting because, I guess a lot of people didn't really know what it was. So I don't think it's that people are deliberately not making content and things accessible, it's just that they're unaware. So part of the reason why I'm sort of talking about this today is to help make them a bit more aware. I think it also has to do with what people define as accessible. In some ways it's a little bit a narrow definition of what they think of accessibility, and you'll see that in some of the responses. So the next question I asked after this was, okay, if you do make your content accessible, what sort of things do you do? And if you don't, is there any reason why you don't? Again, no judgment, just wanted to find out. So this was some of the yes responses. Now, bear in mind too, in the survey it was a free text field, so they could type in everything that they were doing. There was no restrictions, or it wasn't just about pick from a list. So the sorts of things that this person said they did was they used closed captions and alternate tags on images. They look at their font sizes, colour combinations, and there were a few people that said things like that, like all of those things in the one response. A lot of people are doing bits and pieces of that, which is great. But not so many were doing kind of all of it together. People are making sure there's a script available or no time restrictions, so that goes back to giving the user enough time to complete their courses. Writing, keeping the text simple. Now some of these responses were, this is, I guess, what was all that they were doing, and again, I'm not judging, I'm just saying this is kind of all people were doing. Combinations of audio and text. Then we kind of get into a few that kind of look more at, I guess, the infrastructure. So this person said that, well, they test their courses on multiple operating systems. There's enough bandwidth to support the program, and that all learners have access to a computer. And that's true. That's all part of it. We do want them to physically be able to access the content, but also getting people to think more about, well, once they've got there, is then that content accessible for them to be able to complete and learn just as well as anybody else. Then for the no's, so these were the no responses for the ones that aren't necessarily doing anything. And so this person said, well, the audience doesn't really have any guidelines. So probably thinking the way I used to think as well, if no one said anything. The client hasn't required that we include it in our design. This came up a few times. People saying, "Yeah, I know there's something about it, but I don't really know what it is." Or other people said, "Or where can I find out more information about it if I want to start doing this in my courses?" Again, no time, no pressure from management. It's not important right now, so that may get to it. This person said they asked the client, but it's not specific. So if the client doesn't say anything, they won't spend the time, and not important for the majority of audience. So that was kind of the flavour of the no's. And look, in terms of adding some time to development, it can add some time depending on how much you've got to do, but it's certainly more time consuming to get to the end of the course and then go back and try and make it a bit more accessible for people, rather than maybe thinking through those kind of requirements at the start of your development and incorporating them as you go. So I guess the next thing is, after all that, is, well, what can we do? It's such a big area. What are some actual things that we can do, and some tests that we can do to make sure that our e-learning is a bit more accessible? So I've got a few. The next few slides are about some examples of what you can do. Some are storyline specific, but some are just general things that you can kind of do and test as part of your courses. But I know even with the storyline things, I know the other tools can do similar things as well. Okay, so the first thing is about the tabbing order. Now, if any of you have ever tried to complete an online course and just using the tab key, the way that it used to work was that it would tab to all of the objects on the screen, but the order was always top to bottom, like left to right, top to bottom. So in this particular example, if somebody was navigating the course just using their tab and enter keys, it would go to the heading first, then probably the lady, then the number 3, then the select box, then the 4, and then 2, 5, 1, 6, which is kind of not necessarily great if you needed something viewed in a particular order. So what you would have to do is maybe rearrange your screen content so it fits in with, if there's a screen reader or if there's somebody using the tab keys, which then creates a problem, because that then makes it look weird for everyone else. So in Storyline 2 Update 5, what you can actually do is you can actually customise the tabbing order through the screen. So if you have people that are going to tab through their e-learning course, that you can set it up to tab maybe to the heading, the instructions, and then the numbers in the right order. And so you can, if you've got a process or you've got a particular screen layout or design, you can stick with that and just set the tabbing order. And how you do that is in the Home tab of Storyline, there's a tab order button, so up there, sort of on the left of the whole ribbon. And when you click on that for a particular screen, it will give you every object on the screen, and by default it'll be set up left to right, top to bottom. But you can actually, the second option down in the tab order in the big, is create a custom tab order. And then what you can do is, using the arrow keys in the bottom right, you can move objects up and down the tabbing order, or take them out altogether if you don't really need somebody to tab to that particular object. And then you can do that for every screen. So again, maybe a bit more time consuming, but you might only have to do it on screens that require that. Some of your screens may already by default be set up that the tabbing order will be fine. This update too also allows you to put your alternate text all in the one space, rather than having to click on every object and then right-clicking and then adding your alt text to everything. You can actually do it from here as well. So you can go through your whole, put all of your objects on, and then go through and then add your alternate text. And I guess just a couple of tips, and again this is from information that I found, was that things about being accurate and succinct, so you don't have to write a whole story, just information about what the actual the object or the image is. And it really only needs to go on images that have informational value. If something was there for decoration, it doesn't necessarily need to be included. Not having redundancy, so not necessarily repeating words that are already used as part of the text on screen, and also avoiding using terms like in the alt text, image of or graphic of, because people will know what that is, that it is an image of or a graphic of something. Okay, contrast is another area, and something certainly that we'll have control over. And what I guess I'm talking about here, it does apply to if you're using colours against colours, but the example I'll talk about is the colour of your text against the colour of the background of your screen. Now, under the WCAG guidelines, they specify contrast levels. So a minimum contrast level of 4.5 to 1 for normal and 3 to 1 for large text. That's for level AA. And AAA is 7 to 1 for normal and 4.5 to 1 for large. Now, in the guidelines, large text is defined as 18-point size and higher, or 14-point bold and higher. So just to give you an idea of what they're talking about. Now, I wouldn't know by looking at a piece of text on a screen whether it meets the levels or not, so I'll need to get some tools that will help me do that. And there's a couple that are out there that are free that are available. One is from Vision Australia. They have this colour contrast analyzer that you can download to your PC, and it also has an option where you can check for colour blindness, the contrast for that. There's another website that has some really great resources on this called WebAIM, W-E-B-A-I-M, AIM standing for accessibility in mind. And they both work in a similar way, that we add in the codes for the foreground, you know, which might be your text colour, so the HTML code, and then the background colour, and it will actually give you a result to tell you whether it meets the contrast levels. So you can put in your 6-digit codes for your different colours and test it out and see if it would meet those standards. So as an example, this one here, just this particular, and I just did it randomly, just this blue background, and I just picked, you know, black, blue, red, white and yellow coloured text and put in the numbers. And what I found was that the blue and the black, you know, they meet, you know, the AAA level. However, the red, white and yellow don't. You know, the white's only 1.49 and the red is, the yellow is 1.39. I mean, you can hardly read them anyway, so it would be obvious. But you can test them out, especially if you're not sure. Then if I change the colour of the background but kept everything else the same, then my black text on this background for normal at AA level wouldn't meet it, but it would if it was large text. It would be okay. But the white and the yellow become more accessible in terms of like just for level AA normal size. But obviously most of us are probably don't just have text on a plain background. You might do the modern thing and have text on an image and make it look a bit more interesting. So in this particular case, it would be difficult to test because there's all different colours in the background, and I can't really, it's a picture, so I don't really know what all the codes are for all those colours. So I guess what we need to do is, when we're thinking about, you know, the design and the layout of our screens, is that, you know, whether we position that in an area of the image that is lighter, where we know it'll meet the colour contrast levels, or even just doing something like just putting a black background behind it, just to make it really pop out and stand out. And it doesn't really take too much away from the image. And you could do that even if you had a block of text. You could put some sort of a slight background behind it as well, and just make it stand out a little bit more. And that way you could test those colours and see how they compare. So far so good? Okay. I know it's nearly lunchtime, so I'll move it along. Another aspect of WCAG and the guidelines is that we need to make content available that the user can, you know, understand and see and hear. And what I wanted to show here was that colour, and this is at a minimum level, even at a level A, that colour shouldn't be used as the only way of, you know, providing information. So in the first two columns where we, for example, have some answers and we want to indicate that something's correct, just having the text in green or the green dot next to it isn't really the best way to do it, because if somebody had trouble perceiving different colours, those things could potentially look all grey to them, and they wouldn't really be able to tell, you know, the difference whether something was right or wrong just by looking at it, like people that can break those colours apart can. So what it suggested is something more where we're using, you know, symbols of correct or incorrect, like ticks and crosses, or that we also have another way of indicating that a particular response or a particular action is correct, not just relying on colour for those sorts of things. Okay, now our fonts is a big one. The thing with fonts and typefaces is that there's very little agreement as to what is the most readable font, what is the best font to use for e-learning. So Generally, some guidelines around that would be things like not using too many typefaces or fonts on the one layout. I mean, that can be confusing for people anyway. But some suggested fonts are, some examples here that I found. So Arial, Century Gothic, Georgia, Tahoma, and Vedana. Now, they're only suggestions. No one's going to sort of tell you if they're this font or that font or not. I guess looking at those now, even though they're large for the purpose of the PowerPoint, all of those fonts are at the same size. So some fonts that you look at are just naturally bigger, so it can be more appropriate and make it easier for people to read just by using a larger font. Because I guess in reality, if we have to shrink the size of our fonts down so small to fit it all the text on the page, we probably have too much information on the page. Now, our cursive and fancy fonts can look really great on the screen, but again, can be difficult for people to see the difference and to understand what's happening. So again, probably use sparingly if at all, if you can get away with it. But certainly something plainer and that is better for people to use. And the last little area I wanted to talk about was captions and captioning, because it's becoming a bigger thing, and certainly we're getting a lot more requests than in the articulate training. People are asking about it a lot more. And in Storyline, there's a couple of different ways to do it, and I've shown, this is 3 examples of what you can do. The first one would be on the left of the screen there. You can see the notes panel. So if you put your text, your script the text from your script, you can put it into the notes panel in Storyline and then enable that notes panel in via the player settings and then just rename it audio, so it's a bit more meaningful. You could do something like in the top right there, use markers and just have the marker on the screen so that the person would hover or click on it and it would open up and give them an indication of the text. Obviously, you would spell that out at the start of your course as to where they could access the narration script. And then a more dynamic way is to the strip at the bottom. It's got the caption in the percentage symbols. You could make more dynamic, almost closed captioning style by using one text variable, and then breaking up your script and have each little chunk of your script display at certain points while that slide was being displayed. Now, I do have a little demo of it that if you want to stop by the Be Online Centre and give me your details, I can send it to you. It's just a little Storyline file and it's got a little bit of info about what we've covered today. I can send that to you. I'm happy to share that. And I guess that might be fine for audio narration where we've got a script and we've got something that we can break up and put in those triggers and variables and stuff like that. Video is somewhat trickier. I guess if it's a video that you've created, again, you'll have a script that you can use and apply the same sort of methods and have it display on the screen. I should also point out you could also give the user the option whether they wanted to have these kind of captions turned on or off at the start of the course by using true-false variables. But videos are a bit trickier for ones that you haven't made yourself. Now, at the end of the presentation, I've got a link to Tom Coleman wrote a blog post a few months ago about creating closed captions. And he outlined a couple of methods. One was that if you when people upload to YouTube, that can create a text file, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but Microsoft did have a site where you could go and it could make something, and then there was a free website where you could go as well and maybe pull out some text to be able to use in your captions. But the link to that is in the resources at the end, and again, I'm happy to share the slides with all this stuff in it if you would like it. And to wrap it up, the last question I asked in my survey was, does anybody have any other comments about accessible e-learning? And a few of the things that sort of came out was that people are starting to recognise the importance of it. They're starting to think about it a little bit more and incorporating it into their design. And I think people can sort of see the value in it a bit more because it's not just about people with I guess, disabilities. It's about other users that might take our courses that, for whatever reason, have trouble understanding and interpreting what it is that we're presenting to them. So to wrap it up, it is a big area. Accessibility is a big area. There's lots to know. I've certainly learned a lot about it over the last 12 months. But I think by being more aware and starting to incorporate some accessible design throughout the development of our courses, we can make them a bit more user-friendly to people. And Jane Bozarth recently wrote a really good article about accessibility in Learning Solutions magazine. And one of the quotes from that is, she said that it's not just about being compliant, it's about doing the right thing. And it kind of is. You know, we may be mandated in some organisations and industries that we have to abide by it. But for others that aren't, it can be just something that we could, you know, add in and create some value for our users. Because at the end of the day, poorly designed content isn't accessible for everyone, so we need to kind of take some steps as we're designing to make it more accessible. And then, this is my resources list, so I consulted a few things. So it's got links to you know, what Storyline can do with WCAG. It's got stuff on, you know, a quick reference guide if you're interested in finding out more about WCAG, and WebAIM and Vision Australia, and Tom's blog about you know, getting a text for videos. But I think I might be just in. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.